The security footage from July 2022 runs in haunting silence. You watch the starlit silhouette of 19-foot granite monoliths standing like sentinels over a Georgia field. Then, a blinding flash tears the night apart. The shockwave distorts the air, and a massive pillar dissolves into a cloud of dust. An oracle, engineered to outlive the collapse of human civilization, was just eradicated by a single, homemade bomb. We are standing at a terrifying threshold, an era where solid physical reality is actively being overwritten by a digital psychosis. If you cannot decode the invisible forces that drove a phantom to erect these stones and drove a shadow to shatter them, you remain profoundly vulnerable. You become blind prey to the ideological algorithms rewriting the fabric of our society. That midnight blast was not an isolated crime. It was a violent symptom of an existential illness we all carry. I will guide you into the dark heart of the American landscape, hunting for ghosts in the rubble. Together we will sift through the pulverized pyramid blue granite, reading the violent scars left on the stone. Our objective is not merely to unmask the perpetrator who triggered the detonator, but to profile the terrifyingly logical mind of the architect who designed this masterpiece. You are about to receive the key to deciphering the architecture of human fear. The sun rises on a devastated landscape. Heavy yellow excavators crawl across the dew-soaked grass, tearing down the remaining, critically unstable pillars. The violent, mechanical crunching of stone echoes across the empty Elbert County pasture, a brutal sound that drowns out the morning. As the thick dust finally settles, it leaves nothing behind but a bleeding red clay scar in the earth. The physical poetry of this massive monument has been permanently silenced. Let us rewind the clock and examine the corpse of this architectural enigma. At exactly 4:03 in the morning on July 6, 2022, the stillness was irrevocably broken. An explosive device, meticulously placed in the shadows, detonated at the base of the specific pillar bearing inscriptions in Swahili and Hindi. It was a surgical strike against a structure meant to guide the survivors of Armageddon, turning its own immense gravity against it. The sheer kinetic fury of the blast was anomalous. This was not a minor act of vandalism. The detonation generated a massive concussive wave that tore through the heavy southern air, felt by sleeping residents up to 3 miles away. In a fraction of a millisecond, the violent expansion of hot gases pulverized thousands of pounds of solid rock into a fine, blinding powder. The explosive force shattered the structural integrity of a monolith designed to withstand earthquakes and nuclear fire. Looking at the shattered fragments, I feel a cold, hollow sense of profound loss. This act of violence was not simply the destruction of property. It was a deliberate, calculated act of historical erasure. We are staring at a magnificent, complex mystery, but was violently murdered before it could be fully understood by the world. The bomber did not just shatter granite. They stole an intellectual inheritance, permanently obscuring a mirror that reflected our own existential dread. But the true anomaly of this crime scene lies in its immediate aftermath. Instead of locking down the pasture and preserving the site for extended forensic analysis, the response was shockingly swift and destructive. Citing the sheer weight and the precarious instability of the damaged stones, county officials authorized a total demolition. By late afternoon, heavy machinery was actively ripping the surviving pillars from their deep foundations, crushing potential evidence under iron treads. The bureaucratic haste to clear the site feels almost like a panic response, a complex forensic puzzle layered with microscopic chemical residues and structural clues, was bulldozed into a chaotic mound of debris within mere hours. The authorities, perhaps terrified of the dark magnetism the crippled monument exerted, chose immediate safety over the pursuit of truth. In their rush to sanitize the landscape, they became unwitting accomplices in the complete erasure of the oracle's physical memory. As the sun dipped below the horizon on that strange July evening, the American Stonehenge was completely gone. A monolithic structure that had stood defiantly for 42 years was reduced to a mound of meaningless rubble. In a single, chaotic day, the physical evidence connecting us to the anonymous builder's true intent and the shadowy bomber's hidden identity was thoroughly pulverized. The earth was wiped clean, as if the monument had been nothing more than a collective hallucination. I stand in the empty field, listening to the wind howl across the raw, churned dirt. The dust of the monument now mingles with the Georgia clay, scattering its cryptic warnings to the wind. It is a bitter, poetic irony that a grand testament to the brutal mathematics of human survival was so easily swallowed by the earth it sought to protect. The silence left behind is deafening, demanding that we ask the terrifying questions the granite can no longer answer. The dead must be made to speak. We are forced to confront an impossible timeline. A meticulously engineered fortress of thought, birthed in the paranoid shadows of the Cold War, survived decades of societal shifts, only to be abruptly executed by the society it was built to warn. The anomaly lies not just in the explosion, but in the sterile, administrative swiftness of the cleanup. It forces us to look beyond the shrapnel and examine the psychological terror this stone evoked in the minds of those who lived near its shadow. Here lies the ultimate, chilling paradox of our survival. A colossal structure, masterfully engineered to withstand the atmospheric fire and radioactive fallout of a nuclear winter, was legally and entirely demolished by local authorities within 12 hours of being vandalized. It was not an asteroid or an atomic flash that brought the American Stonehenge down. It was legally erased from existence out of a desperate, bureaucratic fear for public safety. What were they really terrified of? To understand why someone wanted this monolithic oracle dead in 2022, we must follow the money back to the ghost who paid for its birth. You have to look past the shattered rubble of the present and step into the quiet, suffocating bureaucracy of the past. The physical destruction of the stone was merely the echo of a phantom who had already successfully erased his own identity 4 decades prior. Through the eyes of the forensic epigrapher, the true crime scene is not a blasted crater in a Georgia field, but a dim, wood-paneled bank office in the summer of 1979. Dust motes hang suspended in a solitary beam of sunlight, catching the silhouette of a finely dressed stranger. He sits across a polished mahogany desk, calmly sliding a carved wooden scale model toward a profoundly bewildered local banker. This is the genesis of an architectural anomaly. The stranger is not just commissioning a massive public artwork, he is executing a masterclass in operational security. The entire project was funded and structured through overlapping layers of legal anonymity that would rival a modern intelligence agency or a deep-cover offshore syndicate. It is the ultimate shell company, built not to launder money, but to launder an ideology. In June of 1979, this elegantly tailored phantom walked into the Elberton Granite Finishing Company and introduced himself using the deliberate pseudonym R.C. Christian. He left no fingerprints on the historical record. He explicitly stated that he represented a small, fiercely loyal group of Americans who had planned this monument for 20 years and who demanded to remain eternally anonymous. Think of the chilling discipline required to fund a globally significant structure while actively refusing the vanity of authorship. In an era where human ego craves permanent recognition, this architect demanded absolute nothingness. The epigrapher recognizes this immediately. You are not tracking a man, you are tracking a void, a perfectly engineered shadow who understood that a message without a messenger becomes a myth. To bypass any potential financial tracking and sever the paper trail, Christian employed the local banker, Wyatt Martin, as his absolute sole intermediary. Before a single dollar changed hands, the architect forced the banker to sign a strictly binding, permanent, non-disclosure agreement. Martin became the only living soul on the planet who possessed the true name of the architect, locking the secret behind the impenetrable vault of legal privilege. This was not a simple cash transaction. It was a ghost dancing through the banking system. The funds materialized like dark matter, arriving in untraceable, staggered cash transfers routed from various financial institutions scattered entirely across the country. It was an obfuscation tactic perfectly designed to blind the authorities. The money was everywhere and nowhere, funneling invisibly into a rural Georgia town to purchase a terrifying amount of permanence. The total capital required to manifest this doomsday compass has never been officially disclosed to the public, adding another layer of frustrating static to the archive. However, historical forensic accounting estimates the cost to have easily exceeded $100,000 in 1980. That is a staggering fortune for the era, weaponized entirely to erect a silent warning for a civilization that did not yet realize it was on death row. But you do not spend that kind of dark money on fragile materials. The ghost required a medium that could withstand the deep, corrosive erosion of geologic time and the immediate, blistering heat of a nuclear flash. The epigrapher runs a gloved finger over the surviving blueprints, noting the exact metallurgical specifications demanded by the architect. He was not just buying stone, he was purchasing geological immortality. The blueprint required the extraction of 119 tons of pure pyramid blue granite, pulled directly from the deep bedrock of the surrounding Georgia landscape. This is not decorative marble. It is one of the densest, most structurally resilient and enduring stones found anywhere on the planet. It is the kind of material you use when you expect the very surface of the earth to be scoured by atmospheric fire. Extracting 119 tons of solid earth is an act of violent geographical surgery. It required massive diamond-tipped saws howling through the bedrock, pulling the ancient spine of the planet to the surface. The investigator sees the paradox clearly. The sheer, crushing mass of the stone was meant to be the ultimate anchor. It was an immovable weight dropped into the rushing river of time, designed to outlast human memory. We are looking at an impeccably clean crime scene where the crime was the legal construction of a nightmare. Every transaction was meticulously sanitized, every contract legally sealed, every slab of granite rigorously inspected. The phantom, known as R.C. Christian, orchestrated a flawless logistical symphony from the shadows, leaving behind a massive physical artifact while completely vaporizing his own paper trail. Yet the extraction of the bedrock and the clandestine laundering of the funds were only the crude mechanical beginnings of his grand design. The true terror was not in the weight of the stone or the terrified silence of the banker, but in the precise celestial mathematics the architect was about to carve into the granite. He was building a machine that would communicate with the cold, indifferent abyss of the stars, long after we were all gone. R.C. Christian did not just buy stone. He bought time. He required an architecture that spoke the silent language of the cosmos. Standing in this empty field at midnight, watching time-lapse photography capture the stars rotating overhead, the true scale of his paranoia reveals itself. The phantom architect knew that human memory is frail, easily erased by a single blinding flash. He needed a medium that could bypass history and communicate directly with eternity. To the untrained eye, the shattered monoliths were just an imposing megalithic structure, a brutalist homage to ancient pagan sites. But looking closely at the surviving blueprints, I see an anomaly. This was not a passive monument. It was an active, intricately calibrated machine, designed to function perfectly on the day the electrical grid finally evaporated into radioactive ash. He built a clock, a calendar, and a compass for the end of the world. You have to understand the terrifying ambition behind this design. When society collapses, we do not just lose the internet or the banking system. We lose our orientation in time and space. The architect anticipated this exact cognitive freefall. He constructed a navigational anchor out of the earth itself, ensuring that whoever crawled out of the bunkers would not be swallowed by the Dark Ages. The stones were a blueprint for the resurrection of civilization. The physical parameters of the monument were obsessively precise. The structure stood exactly 19 feet and 3 inches tall, dominating the rural Georgia horizon. It was arranged in a radial layout, mirroring the ancient megaliths of northern Europe. Yet it was engineered with the unforgiving, zero-tolerance precision of modern aerospace manufacturing. This was Stonehenge, rebuilt by a Cold War defense contractor. Why demand such staggering accuracy from a pile of granite? Because a machine built to converse with the stellar dance cannot afford a fraction of a degree of error. The architect understood that the tectonic plates might shift, and the oceans might boil. But the celestial mechanics of our solar system would remain a constant, untouchable metronome. He tethered his stone oracle to the unyielding rhythms of the cosmos, turning the abyss of space into a survival tool. The true genius of the structure lay hidden in the center pillar, a massive slab that served as the operational heart of the monument. If you stood beneath it at night and looked up, you would see the sky not as a random scattering of light, but as an organized, readable dial. The architect had weaponized the night sky, turning the cold void into a giant, functioning dashboard for humanity's survivors, a way to find absolute north when all magnetic compasses had failed. Carved directly through the center pillar was an eye-level, angled hole, drilled flawlessly from the south face to the north side. This was not a decorative feature. It was permanently aligned with the North Star, Polaris. No matter what season it was, no matter how the Earth tilted on its axis, looking through that narrow tunnel of granite would always reveal that single, fixed point of light in the shifting heavens. The implications of this permanent alignment are profoundly melancholic. When the global positioning satellites inevitably fall from orbit, burning up in the atmosphere like dying fireflies, Polaris will remain. The architect gave the survivors a permanent, indestructible compass. He ensured that the remnants of humanity would never be truly lost in the dark, tethering our fragile biological fate to the indifferent, burning heart of a distant star. But navigating the dark was only half the equation. The architect also needed to capture the violent energy of the day. A post-apocalyptic society cannot rebuild without mastering agriculture, and agriculture requires an exact mastery of time. The monument had to trap the sun itself, pulling its rays down into the granite to tell the survivors exactly when the seasons were turning. The oracle had to speak the language of light just as fluently as it spoke the dark. To achieve this, a precisely calculated slot was carved directly through the center pillar. This aperture perfectly aligned with the sun's position during the solstices and equinoxes. It functioned as a massive, perpetual calendar. Twice a year, the rising sun would frame itself perfectly within the stone, an echoing alignment that signaled the transition of the Earth's orbit. It was a silent alarm clock for the entire planet. Consider the sheer psychological weight of that alignment for a shattered society. In a world reduced to ruins and scavenging, watching the sun lock into that granite slot is the ultimate reassurance that the mechanics of the universe are still functioning. It tells the survivors exactly when the frost will retreat and when to plant their seeds in the irradiated soil. The stone calendar offers the one thing a doomed world craves most: the absolute promise of predictability. The obsession with tracking time reached its peak in the capstone resting heavily atop the pillars. Drilled through this massive roof of granite was a modest 7/8-inch hole. It seems insignificant, a minor architectural detail, until you realize it acted as a flawless, rudimentary sundial. It was a solar sniper rifle, designed to capture a single concentrated beam of celestial energy and project it onto the stone below with devastating punctuality. Every single day, as the Earth rotated toward zenith, a pinpoint of sunlight would pierce that 7/8-inch hole. It would strike the center pillar at exactly noon, creeping along the carved surface to indicate the exact day of the year. It was a heartbeat made entirely of photons, a daily, luminous verification that the planet was still breathing, still orbiting, still chained to the relentless physics of the solar system, totally indifferent to our human tragedies. You are looking at a machine that required no electricity, no maintenance, and no software updates. It was an unhackable, immortal computer running on the kinetic energy of the cosmos itself. As long as the Earth continued to spin, the granite oracle would continue to calculate the time, the seasons, and the directions. The anonymous architect successfully built a technological artifact completely immune to the devastating entropy of human history. Yet this breathtaking celestial clockwork was merely the mechanical frame. The engineering was designed to keep you alive just long enough to read the message. The true, creeping horror of the monument was not in its alignment with the stars, but in the cold, mathematical commandments carved into the face of the stone itself. The architect had given us a clock for the end of the world, but he was about to tell us exactly how few of us were allowed to survive it. The breathtaking celestial clockwork was merely the mechanical frame, a skeleton designed to outlast empires. The true, creeping horror was written directly onto the face of the stone itself. You are standing before an altar of brutal mathematics, a monolith that offers survival with one hand, while demanding an unfathomable sacrifice with the other. The ticking you hear is not just the passage of time. It is a demographic countdown. To the cultural anthropologist analyzing this ideological artifact, the monument presents an immediate, chilling paradox. A digital counter scrolling upward in relentless rhythm, tracking the explosive growth of our species, suddenly hits a psychological brick wall. It stops violently at a specific, deeply unsettling number. A harsh red line cuts across the demographic graph of human history, severing our future from our past. The most infamous of the 10 guidelines carved into the polished granite was the very first command. It read, with the cold detachment of a cosmic auditor, "Maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature." It is a sentence that masquerades as profound ecological wisdom, a poetic vision of planetary harmony. Yet, hidden within its elegant phrasing is the arithmetic of absolute genocide. Consider the terrifying implications of that specific figure. The architect did not suggest a slow, gradual tapering of birth rates. This was a hard, immovable ceiling, cast in stone. The mystery deepens when you realize the sheer scale of the erasure required to satisfy this granite commandment. The stone does not specify who gets to stay on the right side of that red line, and, more importantly, who is condemned to cross it. When the Dark Oracle was unveiled to the public in the spring of 1980, the global population had already reached 4.4 billion souls. The architect knew this. He carved his mandate into the rock, fully aware that to reach his utopian equilibrium, the stone was calling for a population reduction of nearly 90%. It was a retroactive death sentence for billions of people already breathing the Earth's air. 9 out of every 10 human beings wiped from the terrestrial ledger. The poet sees a tragedy of incomprehensible scale, a silent vanishing of generations, cultures, and memories. The builder of the monument looked at the vibrant, chaotic tapestry of human civilization and decided that the only way to save the canvas was to burn almost all of the threads. This was not a warning. It was a manifesto for an empty world. Today, the shadow cast by that monument is even darker. With our current population exceeding 8 billion, achieving that sterile 500 million target would require a cataclysm of apocalyptic proportions. You are looking at an extinction event 75 times deadlier than the Black Death of the 14th century. A biological or nuclear cleansing so profound that the living would truly envy the dead. The sheer gravity of that math is enough to shatter your perception of reality. We are standing on the precipice of a demographic abyss designed by a phantom. If the cold, calculated scale of this engineered apocalypse blows your mind too, hit the like button. And to ensure you do not miss the solution to this dark psychological mystery, subscribe right now. We are just beginning to decode the madness. Who possesses the chilling arrogance to dictate the carrying capacity of the Earth? The anthropologist recognizes this not as a monument to life, but as an altar to a terrifying ideology. It is the ultimate expression of eugenics dressed up as environmentalism. The invisible author reduced the entire chaotic, beautiful struggle of human existence to a simple, brutal equation of resource management and biological control. This is the true existential dread carved into the American Stonehenge. It forces you to look at your neighbor, your family, and yourself and ask, which of us belongs in the discarded 90%? The granite does not offer salvation. It offers a sterile, terrifying triage. It is a psychological mirror reflecting humanity's deepest, most suppressed terror, the fear that we are fundamentally a plague upon our own home. The anomaly here, the corpse in our investigation, is the casual normalization of this horror. For over 4 decades, tourists flocked to this pasture, taking smiling photographs in front of a rock that explicitly called for their own eradication. The true mystery is not just the identity of the man who wrote the blueprint for mass extinction, but the society that tolerated its presence in a quiet Georgia field for so long. And while the physical stones have now been reduced to dust by a homemade bomb, the ideological poison they injected into our collective unconscious remains active. The digital counter continues its relentless ticking. The ghost of R.C. Christian still whispers his dark mathematics into the ears of anyone willing to listen. He planted a seed of profound paranoia, a mathematical virus disguised as planetary salvation. To ensure this grim philosophy survived the nuclear fire he anticipated, the author knew he could not rely on a single, isolated language. He had to ensure that whoever crawled out from the radioactive ashes could read the terms of their survival. He needed to broadcast his brutal arithmetic across the entire shattered globe, building a linguistic fortress that would echo his dark mandate until the end of time. To ensure this dark equation survived the nuclear fire, the architect could not rely on a single, fragile tongue. He had to speak directly to the entire shattered globe. Through the red beam of the high-power laser mapping these precise V-shaped cuts, I am looking at the anatomy of a linguistic virus. The sand-blasted grooves hold the shadows of Russian Cyrillic fading into the elegant, sweeping curves of Arabic. Every millimeter of this fragmented granite tells a story of profound, calculated paranoia. The epigrapher's laser does not merely measure physical depth. It measures the psychological weight of a man preparing for the end of everything. This is not a monument celebrating human achievement. You are looking at a cold, meticulous crime scene constructed decades before the crime was ever committed. I call it the Rosetta Stone of the apocalypse. The anomaly that haunts my analysis is the sheer geopolitical awareness carved into the stone. The architect did not choose local dialects or culturally neutral alphabets. He weaponized linguistics, deliberately selecting the exact languages representing the major nuclear powers of the Cold War. He knew exactly who was going to pull the trigger. The suspect built a linguistic ark, fully anticipating that one of these geopolitical titans would inevitably shatter the world. He carved his 10 commandments into the faces of the 4 outer stones in 8 modern languages. It is a brutal interrogation of our destiny, written in English, Spanish, Swahili, Hindi, Hebrew, Arabic, traditional Chinese, and Russian. Run your fingers over the digital scans of the blast debris. The selection of these 8 modern languages is a masterclass in demographic cold reading. In 1980, these tongues covered the vast majority of the global population. The phantom architect was casting a massive net into the future, guaranteeing that whoever crawled out from the radioactive ash would find his manual for survival. But the inclusion of English and Russian specifically reveals the true underlying motive. These linguistic choices heavily imply the builders expected a catastrophic nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. The granite was a silent observer, waiting for the mutually assured destruction to run its course. It is an instruction manual addressed exclusively to the remnants of a burned hemisphere. Yet the forensic trail grows even colder when we analyze the highest point of the shattered structure. The capstone bore a shorter, far more philosophical message. Let these be guidestones to an age of reason. But this plea for absolute logic was not written for the modern survivor. It was deliberately encrypted in the dead voices of empires that have already succumbed to the dust of history. The laser reveals the geometric perfection of Babylonian cuneiform, the rigid structure of classical Greek, the intricate poetry of Sanskrit, and the pictorial silence of Egyptian hieroglyphs. 4 ancient languages crowning a modern doomsday clock. The detective in me asks the obvious question. Why write a survival guide in languages that absolutely no living survivor would ever naturally speak? Because this was a conversation between ghosts. By using Babylonian cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphs, the author was attempting to bridge the deepest abysses of human time. He was connecting the very first fallen empires of antiquity to the imminent fall of our modern world. It is a deeply melancholic poetry, framing the violent death of our civilization as just another cycle in the endless stellar dance. Who possesses the intellectual arrogance to speak for the dead and dictate to the unborn? We must re-examine the single, fragile alias left behind at the Elberton Bank. The pseudonym R.C. Christian is not a random collection of initials. To the trained eye of the historical profiler, it is a blazing neon sign pointing directly toward a highly specific, centuries-old philosophical obsession. This name is widely considered by historians to be a direct nod to Christian Rosenkreuz. He is the legendary, phantom-like 15th century founder of the Rosicrucian order. They were an esoteric, highly secretive society dedicated to the invisible, alchemical reformation of mankind. Our suspect was not merely a wealthy eccentric. He was a disciple of an ancient tradition of hidden power. The Rosicrucian ideology thrives on the dangerous concept of a hidden elite, guiding the ignorant masses through periods of profound darkness. The American Stonehenge was the ultimate physical manifestation of this arrogance. The architect viewed himself as a modern alchemist, using 119 tons of pyramid blue granite to burn away the impurities of a chaotic, overpopulated world. It is an intellectual horror of the highest order. The creator of the Georgia Guidestones looked at the delicate, fragile beauty of nearly 5 billion human souls and saw only a mathematical error, requiring a brutal correction. He etched his terrifying utopia into the stone, using the languages of our ancestors and our enemies, permanently freezing his paranoia in the geological record. And this is precisely why the structure had to die. It was not destroyed because it was made of stone. It was annihilated because it functioned perfectly as a psychological mirror. Every time we looked at the Babylonian cuneiform or the Russian Cyrillic, we were forced to confront the darkest, most terrifying aspect of our own collective unconscious. We saw our own absolute capacity for total annihilation. The architect translated his fear into the bedrock of the earth, patiently waiting for the bombs to fall. But the true apocalypse did not arrive on the wings of an intercontinental ballistic missile. It arrived through a medium he could never have anticipated in 1980. The silent granite was about to be plugged into a global network of invisible, algorithmically driven madness. For decades, the monument sat quietly in a Georgia cow pasture, slowly weathering under the sun. It was an inert, physical anchor, waiting for a radioactive storm that never came. But when the internet age finally arrived, the silent granite began to scream. To the cultural anthropologist sitting in a dimly lit server farm at midnight, bathed in the blue glow of monitors, the data tells a terrifying story. We are not looking at a physical attack. We are mapping a digital infection. The servers hum, a mechanical heartbeat processing the collective unconscious of a terrified species. On these screens, the viral spread of human paranoia is traced in glowing, branching nodes. The anomaly is striking. The stones themselves did not change. They remained frozen in their astronomical perfection. But the world around them went entirely mad. The American Stonehenge became a massive blank canvas onto which the internet projected its deepest, most agonizing fears of total control. Through the eyes of the researcher, The timeline of this digital autopsy reveals a distinct rupture. Starting in 2008, the Guidestones abruptly transformed. They ceased to be a forgotten roadside oddity and became the dark, gravitational center for a burgeoning digital conspiracy culture. Heavy, fragmented documentaries began to flood early video platforms, dissecting every carved letter. The monument was entirely reframed as a sinister manifesto for a new world order and global eugenics. I watched the data bloom across the monitors like a fungal infection across a petri dish. Each click, each view, each shared link is a trace of evidence left by a terrified mind. The detective work here does not involve physical fingerprints. It requires tracking the evolution of a myth. The author of the stones, our elusive R.C. Christian, believed he was writing a survival manual for the remnants of a nuclear holocaust. Instead, he had unknowingly authored the ultimate apocalyptic trigger warning. The mathematical limit of 500 million, carved into the stone as a grim post-apocalyptic aspiration, was rapidly reinterpreted by the hive mind. It was no longer viewed as a desperate hope for the survivors of a ruined world. The Internet mutated that number into an active, impending threat. It became an accepted, unquestioned blueprint for a planned culling of the human race. The digital crowd believed they were looking at a confession, proudly signed by an invisible global elite. There is a profound, poetic tragedy in this algorithmic distortion. The human brain, evolved to detect predators in the rustling grass, is utterly defenseless against the optimized engagement of a social feed. The fear of death, the oldest shadow in our collective memory, was systematically monetized. Every time a user gasped at the concept of 500 million survivors, the algorithm rewarded their panic with more validation, pulling them deeper into a labyrinth of manufactured dread. The glowing nodes on the map grow denser, shifting from blue to an angry, pulsing red as the timeline advances. We approach the early 2020s, a period when the physical world ground to a terrifying halt. As isolation took hold, the digital ecosystem became our primary reality. In the sterile silence of quarantine, the mind seeks patterns in the chaos. It needs a villain to explain the invisible plague. The granite oracle in Georgia was perfectly positioned to take the blame. During the global pandemic, this algorithm-driven paranoia finally reached a fever pitch. The digital infection breached the firewall of reality. Online communities, united by anxiety and a desperate need for control, began falsely linking the Cold War monument to modern vaccine mandates and sprawling theories of a great reset. The original context of 1979 was entirely obliterated, replaced by a terrifying hallucination of a modern bureaucratic genocide happening in real time. I traced the origin points of these theories, sifting through millions of glitching digital avatars and fragmented comments. The truth was murdered long before the physical bomb was ever built. In this neon-lit morgue of information, you can see exactly how the narrative was hijacked. The monument was stripped of its astronomical purpose. It was dragged from the realm of cold celestial mechanics into the chaotic trenches of modern political warfare. It became a weapon of mass distraction. This is the ultimate metamorphosis of the American Stonehenge. It was no longer a piece of Cold War architecture silently tracking the North Star. It had become a living, breathing, psychological trigger. The ancient fears carved into the granite were perfectly optimized for the dopamine loops of modern outrage media. The algorithm does not care about historical context. It only cares about retention. And nothing holds human attention quite like the promise of our own impending extermination. We built machines to connect us, but instead, they learned to perfectly reflect our internal abyss. The anthropologist staring at the server racks sees the tragedy clearly. The destruction of the Guidestones was inevitable the moment they were digitized. They became a digital voodoo doll, stabbed by a million frightened minds. The physical granite was merely the last thing to break. The real explosion happened quietly, inside the smartphones of millions, shattering our shared consensus of reality. You must understand the sheer terrifying power of this mechanism. A heavy, inert rock sitting in a field in Elbert County was capable of generating enough digital kinetic energy to manifest a physical bomb. The ideas escaped the screen. The paranoia built up a critical mass, demanding a sacrifice. The code wrote a script, and someone out there in the dark, breathing the humid Georgia air, decided it was time to execute the final command. The ghost in the machine was preparing to strike the stone. As the blue light of the monitors flickers across the server room, the grim reality sets in. The architect of the monument wanted to guide us toward an age of reason, but his creation was consumed by an age of madness. We are watching the terminal velocity of a species but has learned to mathematically weaponize its own dread. The digital spark had finally caught fire. And now, all that remained was for someone to gather the ammonium nitrate and turn that digital hatred into physical dust. It was this very algorithmic fever that ultimately crossed the threshold from the digital world back into physical reality on that humid July morning. I watch the sterile white light of the laboratory reflect off the stainless steel of a gas chromatograph. Inside this machine, a microscopic swab of soot from the Elberton blast site is being vaporized. We are looking for the chemical fingerprint of a ghost. Peaks and valleys slowly begin to populate the glowing monitor, graphing the exact molecular signature of the destruction. To the forensic chemist staring at this screen, the graph is a landscape of violence. It is the exact moment where the paranoia we tracked through the server farms finally condensed into something heavy, volatile, and real. The abyss of the internet had found its detonator. Here lies the profound, maddening paradox of this investigation. The bomb was geometrically precise enough to instantly shatter 19 tons of the densest granite on Earth, completely vaporizing the Swahili and Hindi language pillar. Yet, this apocalyptic force left almost zero physical trace of the human hand that ignited it. We have a corpse of monumental proportions, but the killer is less than a shadow. The chromatograph finishes its digital translation. The forensic analysis of the blast residue indicates the use of a devastatingly high-velocity explosive. The chemical markers suggest a commercial-grade compound, or perhaps a highly sophisticated, homemade mix of ammonium nitrate and fuel oil. This is known in the counterterrorism world as ANFO. It is the blunt, brutal chemistry of the lone wolf. Ammonium nitrate is merely agricultural fertilizer. It is meant to feed the earth, to grow the food that sustains our fragile, teeming billions. But when mixed with the black blood of fossil fuels and compressed by human hatred, it becomes a localized supernova. The same elements meant to maintain our civilization were weaponized to tear down a monument built to outlive it. It is a terrifyingly poetic irony. So who delivered this localized supernova into the empty pasture? Security cameras monitoring the perimeter captured a solitary silver sedan rapidly leaving the scene shortly after the blinding flash of the detonation. I stare at the degraded footage. It is a fleeting, pixelated ghost slipping away into the Georgia darkness. The machine did its job, capturing the moment of frantic, violent flight. But the reality of rural infrastructure betrays the investigation. The lack of high-definition license plate capture on those dark, empty country roads left the lead completely cold. The silver sedan becomes a void in the narrative. The driver simply dissolves back into the ether, swallowed by the immense, quiet expanse of Elbert County. The perfect crime requires only the cover of an imperfect grid. The system immediately attempted to correct this anomaly. The state offered a significant monetary reward for any actionable intelligence. Elite state investigative bureaus deployed their best forensic agents to sift through the shattered timeline. You would expect the immense apparatus of modern law enforcement to easily crush a rogue vandal. But the net came up entirely empty, catching only rumors. Months turned into years, and law enforcement has yet to officially name a single suspect. The destruction of the Georgia Guidestones remains an entirely unsolved crime. The digital world screamed for blood, yet the physical perpetrator maintained absolute, chilling silence. It is an evidentiary vacuum. The architect, R.C. Christian, successfully hid his identity in 1979, and his destroyer did the exact same thing in 2022. But the bomber did not act entirely alone. The state itself inadvertently became an accessory to the erasure. The sudden panicked bulldozing of the site by county authorities later that exact same day deeply complicated the forensic timeline. Rather than treating the field as the epicenter of a targeted domestic bombing, the massive yellow excavators rolled in before the dust had even settled. Can only analyze what the investigators managed to scrape from the surface in those few frantic hours. The rest of the chemical narrative is locked away forever, crushed beneath the weight of bureaucratic fear. I look back at the jagged peaks on the laboratory monitor. This is all we have left. A few digital lines representing the violence of a phantom. The bomber weaponized the darkness, the rural isolation, and the explosive potential of common agriculture. But the final layer of this perfect erasure was provided by a panicked society eager to sweep the terrifying mystery entirely out of sight. By destroying the physical crime scene, we blinded ourselves. We traded the pursuit of truth for the illusion of immediate public safety. You must realize the tragedy of this exchange. The monument was an oracle of our deepest fears, and when someone tried to murder it, we rushed to hide the body. The red clay holds the secrets of the explosion, effectively protecting the phantom who set it. We are left staring into a forensic void. The silver sedan drives endlessly through our collective imagination, piloted by an ideology we cannot interrogate. The chemical signature on the screen proves the physical reality of the hatred, but it cannot tell us the name of the man who possessed it. The abyss remains utterly silent, offering no confession and demanding absolutely no absolution. The laboratory light feels suffocating now. We have weighed the soot, mapped the blast wave, and chased the silver ghost to the edge of the county line. The physical investigation has hit a solid, impenetrable wall of red dirt. But there is one final piece of this puzzle buried out there in the empty field. A promise carved in stone, waiting beneath the earth for a future that will never arrive. The screen goes dark on the chromatograph, and I find myself standing back in the empty field at dusk. The camera slowly pans over the flattened red earth, where the wind now cuts uninterrupted through the tall grass. With the granite gone and the bomber vanished into the digital ether, we are left only with these physical scars upon the landscape. And we are left with one final, cruel joke from the phantom architect known as R.C. Christian. Before the county supervisors rushed to bury this mystery entirely, excavation crews brought in heavy machinery to dig directly beneath the exact center of the former monument. They were searching for a legacy. The explanatory slab at the site had explicitly promised a historical time capsule, clearly stating that it was placed 6 feet below this spot. They tore into the bedrock, expecting to unearth the foundational blueprint of the apocalypse. But the excavation revealed absolutely nothing. The deep trench held only compacted clay and the silent roots of Georgia weeds. The promised time capsule never existed at all. It was a phantom, buried beneath a ghost, serving as a final, masterful piece of psychological misdirection by the anonymous architect. Even in its death, the American Stonehenge refused to grant us the comforting closure of a simple, legible answer. The forensic epigrapher closes the file, stepping away from the shattered dirt as the evening shadows lengthen. This is where we leave the physical investigation behind, because the true crime scene is no longer out here in Elbert County. I need you to look at this empty horizon and recognize what it actually represents. We sought the identity of a single bomber, but the verdict points toward a much more terrifying collective guilt. For decades, we operated under the illusion that this structure was merely a passive observer of cosmic time. We analyzed the 19 tons of pyramid blue granite, the flawless alignment with the North Star, and the solstice calendar carved with aerospace precision. We thought we were looking at an astronomical clock built to guide the traumatized survivors of a thermonuclear winter. But the stones were never looking at the stars. The monument was looking at us. It was a psychological mirror, perfectly angled to reflect humanity's deepest existential terrors. When R.C. Christian commanded that our numbers be kept strictly under 500 million, he was drafting the arithmetic of genocide disguised as ecological balance. He translated this dark equation into 8 modern languages, explicitly targeting the geopolitical superpowers of a divided, paranoid world. Yet the profound irony is that the American Stonehenge did not fall to the blinding flash of a Soviet warhead. It survived the geopolitical brinkmanship of the late 20th century, only to be entirely consumed by the algorithmic psychosis of the 21st. The physical granite did not change, but the global nervous system surrounding it mutated. The internet projected its own profound dread onto the blank canvas of the stone. We witnessed the terrifying power of an invisible contagion. Millions of isolated digital nodes synchronized into a single wave of ideological fever, transforming a Cold War architectural curiosity into an active, impending threat. The algorithms hacked our ancient biological survival instincts, turning the abstract concept of a global elite into a visceral enemy. Paranoia became the supreme currency of our new, interconnected reality. And so, we arrived at the ultimate, devastating paradox of this entire investigation. A monolithic fortress, meticulously engineered to withstand the total collapse of human civilization, was obliterated by the very civilization it was desperately trying to warn. Furthermore, it was legally bulldozed and ground into dust by local authorities within 12 hours, entirely out of a desperate, bureaucratic fear of public reaction. This erasure proves a chilling scientific axiom. Our greatest existential threat is not a natural apocalypse, a stray asteroid, or the slow death of the sun. The most destructive force in the known universe is the dark matter of our own collective suspicion. We could not tolerate the agonizing weight of the unknown, so we generated the real-world kinetic energy necessary to shatter 19 feet of solid rock, just to silence the whisper. We are no longer the frightened survivors cowering in the shadow of the atomic bomb. We have evolved into a highly networked superorganism that routinely hallucinates its own demons and then violently attacks the physical world to destroy them. The blast in 2022 was simply a glitch bleeding over from our corrupted digital reality into the dirt of Georgia. We destroyed the mirror because we hated the face staring back. Look closely at the barren field that remains. It is the perfect, unintended epitaph for our current empire. A completely empty plot of earth, stripped of its history, scrubbed clean of its warnings, and smoothed over by the heavy machinery of willful ignorance. We have successfully murdered the oracle, and now we must navigate the encroaching darkness without a compass, relying only on the flickering, unstable glow of our own screens. If this forensic journey into the architecture of fear has shattered your own illusions and given you a new perspective on the fragile nature of our reality, hit the like button. That is how we know our investigation is digging in the exact right direction. Subscribe to the channel to continue this research with us, and leave a comment below with your final verdict. We need to document our logic before the digital algorithms overwrite it. The cosmos remains utterly indifferent to our frantic self-destruction. The North Star still holds its precise position in the eternal dark, waiting for an observer who is no longer there. We are alone with our choices, trapped in a fragile world where the loudest voices have erased the quietest wisdom. The case is closed, but the countdown has only just begun. Stay vigilant out there. Signing off.